down. I want that museum piece of casing right next to me. No warning, no consequence. Sable once set it on the open guard frequency so the whole region would hear him do it, and two of the most advanced fighters in American airspace rolled into attack formation against a single A-10 that every radar screen showed was completely, absolutely alone. They had her outnumbered, outrun, outgunned. What they didn't have was her name. Subscribe right now, hit the notification bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Stay with me to the end, because what she does in the next 4 seconds, nobody in that sky saw coming. At 4:40 in the morning, Lieutenant Sienna Rourke walked the length of her aircraft for the third time in Sergeant First Class Elias Boone let her do it without saying a word. He'd already checked it. Twice. He'd run the systems, sweep at Go 310, run it again at Go 405, because something in the portside hydraulic lineman had thrown a soft flag on the first pass and cleared itself on the second, and a flag that cleared itself was the kind of thing most crew chiefs logged and forgot. Boone had been doing this for 22 years. He didn't forget this. He also didn't stop her from walking. She had her flight suit knotted at the waist sleeves, hanging an olive drab sports bra and camouflage trousers in a ponytail, still damp at the base of her neck. From a shower she'd taken at Go 350 because she'd learned somewhere along the way that cold water at 4 in the morning did something useful to the nervous system. 25 years old. She looked standing next to that enormous, ugly slab of an airplane like somebody's kid sister who'd wandered onto the wrong side of the flight line. Boone had watched a lot of pilots pre-flight a lot of aircraft. He knew the difference between a pilot checking an airplane and a pilot doing something else. Rourke wasn't checking the airplane. Rourke was bringing her heart rate down. "She's good," he said when she came back around the nose. "Fuel's top, guns loaded, systems clean. Twice, which means you found something the first time." Boone rubbed his forearm without thinking about it, leaving another smear of grease across skin that had been carrying grease since before the sun had any opinion on that. Portside hydraulic threw a soft flag at 0310, self-resolved at 0405. "It's nothing." "But you're telling me." "Yes, ma'am." She stopped, looked at him, and Boone, who had told exactly 4 pilots in 22 years about things that had self-resolved because most of them didn't want to hear it, and the ones who did want to hear it usually wanted to hear it so they could file it against you later, watched something quiet move behind her eyes. "Why?" she said. "Because you're the only one who wants to know about the things that fix themselves." She nodded once. That was all. She turned back toward the equipment bay, and Boone went back to his tablet, and neither of them said anything else about it, because that was the whole conversation, and both of them knew it. The parking lot outside the operations building had a vehicle in it that hadn't been there yesterday. Dark SUV, government plates missing back into the far slot near the fence, where the security cameras had a blind angle that everybody on base knew about and nobody talked about. 2 men inside it. Neither of them got out. Sienna looked at it for 3 seconds while she walked past. Then she filed it somewhere behind her eyes with the rest of the things she'd learned not to ask about and went to her briefing. The mission brief was ordinary right up until the part where it wasn't. Joint Training Exercise, Redstone Flats, Nevada. 14 personnel moving through the Cascabel Canyon corridor to restore an emergency relay station that a sandstorm had knocked out 11 days ago. 9 Navy engineers, 5 civilian contractors, real vehicles, real people. A single close air support asset providing overwatch, while an aggressor element played hostile fighters, and everybody went home at noon and wrote it up. That was the part that was ordinary. The part that wasn't ordinary was the number. 14, Sienna said. Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Hare looked up from the board. 14. 5 of them civilian. 5 of them civilian. In a live corridor. In a training corridor, Hale said. And then, because she'd worked with Rourke for 19 months and knew exactly what that flat repetition meant, she added, the relay has to come back up before the fire season assessment. It's a scheduling problem, not a tactical one. The aggressors are flying scripted profiles. They'll make 3 passes, will grade the intercepts, everybody goes to lunch. Sienna said nothing. Rourke, ma'am, say it. There's no such thing as a scripted profile, Sienna said. There's a profile people intend to fly. That's different. Hale held her eyes for a moment, then she made a note on her tablet that she didn't explain and moved on. At 6:12, Lieutenant Marcus Adeyemi checked his mirrors for the fourth time in 8 minutes and told himself to stop checking his mirrors. 27 years old, 2nd Independent Convoy Command, hands at 10 and 2 like a man taking a driving test. Beside him, Sergeant First Class Danilo Vega had his boots on the ground and his eyes half closed, in the specific unbothered stillness of somebody who had done this in 4 countries and no longer found it interesting. "You're gonna wear out the mirror," Vega said without opening his eyes. "I'm running spacing." "You're running spacing on a road with 1 lane and no traffic." "I'm establishing a habit," Vega grunted. It might have been approval, it might not have been. Adeyemi keyed the airnet. "Overwatch, this is Anvil 6 convoy is rolling 14 souls ETA to the quarter mouth is 11 minutes. The voice that came back was younger than he expected and calmer than anything he'd heard on the radio in 3 deployments. "Anvil 6 Overwatch. Copy 14. I've got you." That was it. 3 words at the end. "I've got you." Not acknowledged, not maintain your interval. Not any of the 60 procedural phrases that meant the same thing and cost nothing. Adeyemi felt something in his shoulders come down half an inch, and he didn't understand why, and it bothered him that he didn't understand why. "Who is that?" he said. Vega opened one eye. "Rourke," he said. "That means something to you." Vega closed the eye again. "It means something to somebody," he said. "Ask me again in an hour." At 6:47, the morning stock was being loaded. Sienna was at 11,000 feet in a lazy left-hand orbit over the core of the mouth, running her 3rd fuel calculation of the flight, not because the number had changed, but because running numbers was how she kept her hands from getting bored when Hale came up on the control frequency with a voice that had gone about 10 degrees colder than it had been at the briefing. "Overwatch Control, unscripted development. Your 2 support assets have been grounded on the deck. Mechanical, both of them." Both. Same fault code 12 minutes apart, and I don't like that any more than you do." A beat. "You are sole air assigned over the corridor. Acknowledge." "Acknowledge," Sienna said. "What's the threat picture?" There was a pause on the frequency, and Sienna listened to that pause the way she'd once listened to the space between mortar rounds, and she understood. Before Hale said anything that the answer was going to be bad. "The threat picture has changed," Hale said. "Aggressor element is Sable 1 and Sable 2. They came off their scripted profile 8 minutes ago. We've lost contact with the exercise controllers embedded with their flight." Another pause. "I can't tell you what they're going to do because right now I can't tell you what they think they're doing." Sienna's hand was already moving across the camera. Trim, power, orbit shifting from Z to purposeful without any obvious change in the geometry. "Ma'am," she said, "I want that stated plainly on the record. Are those 2 aircraft operating under exercise constraints, or aren't they?" Rourke. "I have 14 people in a canyon, and 5 of them have never worn body armor in their lives. I need it clean." Hale exhaled. "I don't know," she said. "That's the plain version. I don't know." Sienna looked down at the dust trail 6 kilometers below her. 4 vehicles crawling toward a gap in the rock that narrowed to less than half a mile of straight. And she did something she had never once done in 11 months of flying this airplane. She reached out and put her palm flat against the inside of the canopy rail. Just for a second, just long enough. Then she keyed the ground in. "Anvil 6 Overwatch, change to your instructions. I want you closed up to 15-meter spacing, and I want your speed at whatever the slowest vehicle can hold without stopping. Not fast, continuous. If you stop in that throat, you're a photograph." Adeyemi's voice came back tight. "Overwatch, is there a problem?" "There's going to be noise overhead in the next few minutes," Sienna said. "Some of it's going to sound close. When it happens, I need you to do exactly one thing for me. Ma'am, don't look up." She heard the 2 of them before her radar had a clean picture, and that told her something. They weren't hiding. 2 fighters coming out of the northeast at altitude. On a descending track, engines wide open, no attempt at macking, no attempt at surprise. Men who had decided the surprise was unnecessary. That was a choice. Everything in the air was a choice, and every choice told you something about the person making it. And Sienna Rourke had spent 3 years of her life lying behind rocks with a radio pressed to her ear, learning to read what men were telling her about themselves when they thought they were only maneuvering. They're not trying to win the intercept, she thought. They're trying to be watched, which meant somebody was watching. She filed that one too. Then the guard frequency opened the emergency channel. One every aircraft in 400 miles monitored the one you did not use for conversation, and a voice came out of it in accented English. Unhurried, faintly amused, pitched exactly right for an audience. Solo A-10 on the corridor. I see you down there all by yourself. Where did your friends go? Sienna said nothing. No answer, that's all right. We can see you very well from up here. A pause, and she could hear him smiling. Could hear the specific shape a mouth makes around words when it's enjoying. Interesting aircraft you have. Very slow, very loud. There is one exactly like it on a concrete pad outside the Air Museum in the city where I grew up. Children climb on it. They have a little sign. His wingman laughed. That was the part Sienna paid attention to. Not the speech. The speech was theater. She'd known it was theater from the first syllable. The laugh. Because the laugh was real. Short surprise genuinely delighted the laugh of a man who hadn't been briefed to laugh and had done it because he actually thought it was fun. The commander is performing, she thought. The wingman is not, which made the wingman the more interesting problem. She keyed the transmitter. Sable Flight, this is Overwatch. You are operating inside an active exercise corridor with ground personnel. Recommend you reestablish contact with exercise control and return to your designated area. The laugh came again from the leader this time. Oh, he said, she speaks. Boone heard it. He was standing at the maintenance desk in the hangar with his tablet in one hand and the monitoring feed hissing out of the speaker. Somebody had bolted to the wall in 1997, and when the accented voice came through it, she speaks. Two of his younger technicians looked up. One of them started to say something. Boone raised a hand about 4 inches off the desk. Just 4 inches. Both of them shut up. He set the tablet down and stood there with his palms flat on the workbench and listened, and the grease on his forearm caught the light. And he thought about a soft hydraulic flag that had cleared itself at 0405. Come on, man, he said so quietly that neither of them heard it. Don't let him get in. No. Tell me, the voice went on warm and easy. Female pilot in the old airplane. Are you frightened? It's all right if you are. There's no shame. You are extremely alone up there, and your aircraft is extremely slow. And I have a very bad habit of saying true things out loud. Sienna was doing 4 things while we talked. She was building his intercept geometry. She was cross-referencing the terrain under her against the topographic profile she'd studied for 6 hours the night before, and roughly 400 hours before that. She was watching her field curve, and she was listening, not to what he said, to how he said it, the cadence, the pauses, the places he put emphasis, the way he came off a sentence. Because a voice was data. A voice was the only sensor she had that could see inside another man's cockpit. She'd learned that lying in the dirt. She keyed the mic. Sable 1. She speaks again. This is a good morning. How long have you been flying? The pause that followed was very short, and she heard every millisecond of it. It caught her. She could hear it catching, the tiny hitch of a man who had a script for fear and a script for anger and a script for bravado and no script at all for a small, polite question about his resume. 12 years, he said, and there was a fraction more pride in it than he'd meant to put there. Good, Sienna said. Then you've been alive long enough to learn something from this morning. Silence. And then on the guard frequency, faint, half-swallowed Sable. 2 said something to his leader in their own language. And Sienna caught exactly 1 word of it, a word she'd heard before in a different country from a different man and had never once forgotten. Prizrak. Ghost. The wingman had stopped laughing. She counted the silence. 7 seconds, 8, 11. At 14, the leader came back and the warmth was still in his voice. But it was working now. It had to be carried, and Sienna knew exactly what that cost a man and exactly how long he could pay it. You have an interesting way of speaking Overwatch. I've been told. Most pilots in your situation would be repositioning by now. Climbing, extending, something. A beat. You have not moved. No. Why not? Because you're not here yet, Sienna said. She watched the 2 contacts on her scope come down the descending track, and she held her orbit exactly where it was directly over the throat of the cannon, and she did not move a single degree. The first pass was a feint, and she knew it before they started it. They came in fast and high on a screaming diagonal that crossed above the corridor at a range they clearly considered generous. The kind of pass designed to make a slower aircraft flinch, to make her brake, to push her out into the open sky above the ridgeline, where their speed and altitude would stop being an advantage and start being a math problem with only one answer. Everything about it was built to make her react. She didn't react. She held the orbit. She held the altitude. She held the airspeed. She watched them blow past above and ahead of her, and she kept her hands exactly where they'd been, and the only thing that changed in that cockpit for the entire duration of the pass was that her jaw came together a little tighter, and nobody saw that. On the ground, A-10 flinched so hard he nearly put the lead vehicle into the rock wall. The sound came through the roof of the cab like something physical, like weather with intent, and the entire convoy heard it, and the entire convoy felt it, and A-10's foot came off the accelerator on pure automatic reflex. "Don't stop," Vega said, and he'd taken his boots off the dash. "I'm not..." "You came off the pedal. Get back on the pedal." A-10 got back on the pedal. His hands were shaking. He hated that his hands were shaking. Behind them in the third vehicle, a civilian contractor named Corinne Ashby had gone completely still, her hand braced against the door frame, and her eyes on the sliver of sky visible above the canyon walls, and she was thinking with total clarity that nobody in the safety briefing had covered this. The AirNet crackled. Anvil 6 Overwatch. Status. A-10 keyed the mic, and his voice came out wrong. Cracked in the middle, and he heard it, and there was nothing he could do about it. Overwatch. They came right over us, man. They came right over. Marcus. He stopped. She'd used his first name. He hadn't given her his first name. "Listen to me," Sienna said, and her voice hadn't moved a millimeter from where it had been at 0612 when she said, "I've got you." That was noise. Noise is free. Nothing that happened just now cost you anything. How far to the throat? He looked at the nav. He had to look twice because the numbers didn't want to hold still. 8 minutes. Then for the next 8 minutes, there are 8 minutes, she said. That's the whole world, not the sky, not those aircraft, not me. 8 minutes of road. Can you do 8 minutes of road? A-10 swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Good, don't look up. The net went quiet. Vega settled back against the seat and looked at the side of A-10's face for a long moment. Huh, he said. What? Nothing, Vega said. Drive. Up top, the leader came back around, and this time he brought himself lower. You did not move, he said. No, not at all, not 1 degree. I watched the track. Something had shifted underneath the amusement, a small hard grain of genuine curiosity that hadn't been there 4 minutes earlier. I have flown against F-15s, F-16s, F-22s. Good pilots, very good pilots. Every one of them knew. They had someone better. And you don't... Nope, mate, Sienna said. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The pause this time was longer. You know, he said, and his voice had gone thoughtful in a way that was more dangerous than the mockery had been. I've heard that A-10 pilots develop a strange attachment to their aircraft, that it becomes part of them. Is that true for you? Sienna didn't answer. I asked, he said, because I would like to understand you a little before I finish this. And that was when she made the decision. She'd been holding it in reserve since the first transmission, turning it over, weighing it, checking it against the fuel and the terrain, and the 8 minutes of road, and the 5 civilians who'd never worn one. Because what she was about to do was going to make this personal, and personal was the most dangerous thing you could introduce into a fight, and personal cut in both directions, and there was no way to control which direction to cut hardest. But a man performing for an audience makes predictable choices. And a man who has just discovered he's been underestimating you makes emotional ones. She needed him emotional. She needed him pushing when he should be pulling. She needed him committing when he should be patient, because patient was the one thing she could not survive, patient in fuel. And fuel was the only clock in that sky that was running against her and only her. So she keyed the mic. You want to understand me, she said. Very much. Then ask your command for my name. The beat. Your name. Lieutenant Sienna Rourke, she said, United States Navy. Ask them. I'll wait. The silence that followed was different from every silence that had come before. She counted it the way she counted everything. At 31 seconds, Sable 2 transmitted something to his leader that clipped the edge of the guard frequency before he corrected it, and Sienna caught 2 words in accented English before the channel closed. Sure, are you sure? At 47 seconds, the leader came back on the open frequency. and everything that had been in his voice for the last 11 minutes was gone. Not softened, gone. Stripped out at the root. What replaced it was flat-clipped economical, the voice of a professional who has stopped performing and started working. And Sienna, alone in that cockpit at 11,000 feet, with her hands quiet on the controls, felt something in her chest grow very still and very cold and very calm. Sable 2, he said. Break right. New approach. Sector 3. That was all. No jokes. No museum. No little sign. No, are you frightened? Sienna Rourke let out a slow breath inside her helmet and said to absolutely no one, there you are, my brother. Down in the canyon, Vaga had his handheld pressed to his ear and had been listening to the guard frequency for 9 straight minutes without moving. He stopped talking, and then said, yeah. Is that good? Vega lowered the radio. No, he said. Adeyemi's hands tightened on the wheel. Sergeant, do you know why they call her the Widowmaker? The question landed sideways. Adeyemi glanced at him. That's her call sign. That's not a call sign, Vega said. Call signs get assigned. That one got earned, and there's a difference. And everybody who's ever been on the ground under her knows exactly what the difference is. He was quiet for a second. The tires ground over gravel. Somewhere overhead there was a sound like the sky tearing. 18 months ago, Vega said. She wasn't a pilot. Adeyemi looked at him. Say again. She wasn't a pilot, Vega said. 18 months ago, that woman was on the ground. JTAC, Special Operations, she was the one calling it in, not the one flying it. 3 years of it, 3 years of lying in the dirt of the radio, talking to whoever was up there trying to get them to hear her. He turned the handheld over in his hands. There was a ridge, he said. I wasn't there. I know 2 guys who were. 7 people pinned on a slope, and every air asset in the region got pulled for a higher priority target, and the recall order went out 3 times. He stopped. 3 times, Lieutenant. 3 separate recalls, all of them lawful, all of them from people who were reading the situation off a screen 400 miles away. What happened? She stayed on the net for 9 hours, Vega said. 9 hours. Broken leg, no medevac, and she kept talking until something finally healed. And when the after action got written up, half the people in the room wanted her decorated, and the other half wanted her charged. And in the end, they gave her a letter for one and a medal for the other, and nobody's ever been able to explain to me how that works. The convoy rolled. 7 people came down that ridge, Vega said. She came down last. Adeyemi didn't say anything for a long moment. So how does a JTAC end up in an A-10? Vega, it wasn't a warm sandwich. 6 months later, she put in for the transition program, he said. They told her no. She reapplied. They told her no again. 3rd time, somebody with stars finally asked her why she wouldn't drop it. He looked out the windshield. You want to know what she said? Yeah. She said she was tired of begging the sky. Adeyemi's hands were steady on the wheel now. He noticed that distantly like it belonged to somebody else. That's why she doesn't move, Vega said. Every one of those fighter guys up there thinks she's holding station because she's stubborn, or because she's showing off, or because she doesn't understand what she's up against. He shook his head slowly. She's holding station because she has spent 3 years of her life being the person on the ground looking up. She knows exactly what it does to you when the airplane lands. He put the handheld back to his ear. She's not going to leave, he said. You understand whatever happens up there in the next hour, she's not going to leave. That's not courage. Courage is a decision. This is something else. This is just what she is now, saying. At 11,000 feet, Sienna Rourke ran the numbers one more time and got an answer she didn't like. Fuel workable, not comfortable. Canyon maneuvering would burn it at nearly double the straight line rate, and she had generously 40 minutes of aggressive flying before the number stopped being a resource and started being a countdown. Threat 2 5th-generation fighters currently repositioning into a coordinated approach that was geometrically cleaner than anything they've attempted so far. One high, one wide. Angles that closed off every direction she could go. Assets 1 aircraft designed 60 years ago to absorb punishment and stay flying. 1 Canyon system she had flown more than 400 times. 1 gun that modern air combat had decided was obsolete. And a voice on a radio that a man 12 years her senior had just stopped laughing at. She thought about Boone with grease on his forearm at 4 in the morning, telling her about a fault that had fixed itself because she was the only one who wanted to know. She thought about 14 people in the canyon, and 5 of them in cargo pants and safety vests. She She thought about a ridge 18 months ago, and the sound a recall order makes when you acknowledge it, and then keep talking anyway. And then Sable One came back on the guard frequency, and everything about his voice had changed a second time. Lieutenant Rourke, Sable One, my command has given me your name. A pause measured careful the pause of a man selecting words in a second language, because the first ones that came to him weren't good enough. They also gave me some advice. I imagine they did. They advised me to be very careful. Sienna watched her scope, high and wide, the angles closing. Are you going to take it? She said. There was a very long silence on the open frequency. No, said Sable One, and he rolled in. He rolled in and Sienna Rourke went down, not away, down off the top of her orbit, nose low throttles back instead of forward dropping toward the canyon mouth, at a rate that would have looked to any outside observer like an aircraft giving up altitude it could never get back. That was exactly what she wanted it to look like. Because altitude was what they understood. Altitude was currency in their world, the thing you spent and hoarded and fought over. And a pilot who threw away 11,000 feet of it in front of two fifth-generation fighters was a pilot who had panicked. She hadn't panicked. She was buying rock. The cascable system opened underneath her like a wound in the earth, and she put her aircraft into it the way she'd put it into that canyon 400 times before, and at the moment, her radar signature folded into the return. Off the eastern wall, she simply stopped existing. She heard it happen. Sable 2's transmission came across the guard frequency as a single sound that wasn't a word, a hard, sharp, involuntary bark of a man whose scope had just gone empty. Then his leader, and the leader's voice was fast now, and fast was information. Sable 2 contact. Negative contact. Say again. I have no contact, she is gone. She went into the terrain. Then find her, Sienna running low and quiet with her wingtips closer to the eastern wall than any instructor would have signed off on. Listened to a man tell another man to find her, and felt something in her chest unclenched about a quarter of an inch. Good, she thought. Now you're in my house. Boone heard it from the hangar and put both hands flat on the workbench. One of his technicians, a kid named Ruiz, who'd been on the flight line 11 weeks, said, "Is she hiding?" "No," Boone said, "but they can't see her." That's not the same thing. Ruiz waited for more. Boone didn't give him any because Boone was doing arithmetic. Canyon flying at that altitude, that speed, that ambient temperature. The fuel burn was somewhere north of double, and he fueled that aircraft himself at 0234, and he knew to the pound what she'd left with. He picked up a rag he didn't need and wiped his hands on it and put it back down. "Get me a fresh gauge log on Bay 2, he said, and Ruiz. "Sarge, don't talk for a while." In the canyon, the noise changed, and Corinne Ashby noticed it before anyone in her vehicle did. She was 34 years old. She fixed relay antennas. 11 days ago, she'd been eating lunch in an air-conditioned office in Henderson when the tasking came through, and she'd said yes because the per diem was good and because she'd never seen the Cascabel, and people said it was beautiful. Nobody in the safety briefing had covered the sound two fighters make when they're looking for something and can't find it. "They're circling," she said. The Navy engineer beside her, a kid maybe 22, looked at her. That's the training thing, right? That's part of it." Ashby had spent 4 hours that morning watching the convoy commander's shoulders, and she had watched them go from tight to tighter to something that wasn't tight anymore because it had gone past tight into a place where a man simply drives. "Sure," she said, "that's part of it." She put her hand flat against the door frame and left it there. Sienna came around the first bend at a speed that would have embarrassed a Cessna, and she used every foot of it. Slow was the whole point. Slow was the thing they couldn't do. Two aircraft built to live at 600 knots were now hunting for a system of hard stone corners that punished anything that couldn't turn tight. And every corner she took at 240 knots was a corner they had to take at 400 or overshoot entirely. Overshoot was position. Position was the whole conversation. She keyed the ground net. "Anvil 6 Overwatch, talk to me." IDME's voice came back, and it had changed since the first pass. Steadier, not calm steady, which was a different and better thing. 4 minutes to the throat. Spacing is 15 meters, speed is holding. Anybody stop? Nobody stopped. "Good man." "Ma'am," he hesitated. "They're not overhead anymore. They're behind us." "Are they?" "They're in the canyon with me," Sienna said. "That's where I want them. 4 minutes of road markers. That's all there is." She cut the net before he could ask the follow-up, because the follow-up was going to be, "Are you okay?" And she didn't have the fuel to answer that, honestly. She'd named the 3 hard sections of the Cascabel years ago, back when she was still lying in the dirt and reading the topographic charts for fun, because it was the only way to feel like she had any say in what came out of the sky. The mill was first a compound left-right, where the thermal draft coming off the eastern face fought the turn and tried to roll you into the wall. It required a counter input that was completely viscerally wrong the first time you did it. She'd learned it by getting it wrong twice with an instructor who'd aged 4 years and 90 seconds. She took the mill at 240 without thinking about it. Sable 2 hit it 11 seconds behind her at nearly twice that speed. She heard the engine note change on the open frequency, a hard, ugly spool as he fought the draft, and then the word in his own language, short and sharp and entirely sincere, and then a drop. Altitude loss. She could hear it in the pitch. He caught it. He caught it well. She'd give him that. The recovery was clean and fast and came from real hands. But it cost him 300 feet, and it cost him energy. And in a canyon, energy was the only thing anybody actually had. Sable 2 status. I'm good. You are not good. Your altitude dropped 400 feet. There's a draft off the east wall. It isn't on the chart. It isn't on the chart. Then fly the airplane and stop reading. Sienna listened to that exchange with the specific attention of somebody counting cards. He's rattled, not broken, rattled. And the leader is covering it, which means the leader knows. She came out of the mill, climbing straight to the exit energy for 200 feet and used those 200 feet to look. What she saw made her stomach drop. The wingman had not in fact gone chasing her the way she'd assumed he would. He'd fallen back and gone high up out of the canyon into the clear air above the ridgeline, sitting in a lazy wide orbit that put him nowhere near her and everywhere at once. He wasn't hunting, he was watching, waiting for the moment she had to come up out of the rock, which she eventually would because everybody eventually did. Sienna had read him as the impulsive one, the one who laughed, the junior man, the reactive one, the one you baited. She had been wrong. The laugh had been the only honest thing in that first transmission, and she'd built her entire read on it, and the man attached to that laugh had just done the single most patient thing available to him. Her mouth went dry. That's the dangerous one, she thought, and the thought came with a cold little jolt of professional embarrassment that she filed and did not have time to feel. That's been the dangerous one for 20 minutes, and I've been flying against the wrong man. She adjusted, and adjusting cost her. Because the trap she'd been building for the last 4 minutes, a geometry problem set up around the bottleneck, designed to make an impulsive wingman overshoot into a corner he couldn't recover from, was now a trap set for nobody. And she was already inside it, committed to a line and a speed that made sense only if somebody was chasing her. Nobody was chasing her. Sable 1 was. He came into the bottleneck from the north at a speed that was reckless and precise. At the same time threading a quarter, he had no business threading. And Sienna understood in one flat instant that he had spent the last 4 minutes doing to her exactly what she'd been trying to do to his woman. He'd let her think she was hunting. She had a quarter of a second to decide, and the decision was ugly. She pulled. Everything the airframe had a hard screaming load limit brake to the right that put the wall so close she could count the strata, and the aircraft came around, and it came around, and it came around, and it held. Something in the airframe made a noise she had never heard it make. She came out the far side with her heart hammering, and her hands absolutely still, and a scrape of sound still ringing somewhere in the structure behind her. And 3 weeks later, Elias Boone would find the stress signature from that break in the main spar, and would stand looking at it for a full minute without saying anything to anybody. Sable 1 went past her at a distance that had no business being survivable for either of them. And on the guard frequency, before he could stop himself, he said one word. Boja. Sable 1 say status. I'm through. A breath, 2. I'm through. She turned inside me. Inside me. She turned inside me in the corridor at that width. He stopped. Started again, and when he came back, his voice had a control laid over the top of it like a lid on a pot. Sable 2, hold your position above the ridge. Do not come down. Do you copy? Do not come down. Copy holding. Sienna 600 feet lower and running for the next bend. Heard the leader say, hold, and understood exactly what it meant. He'd stopped trying to catch her. He was going to make her come up. Lieutenant Rourke, Sable 1, that maneuver. A pause. I want to say something and I want you to understand it is not a compliment. I do not know if you understand the difference in English. Try me. You broke at the load limit of your airframe inside a corner with less than 40 meters of clearance, he said. That was not skill. That was a correction. You were somewhere you did not intend to be. Sienna's jaw tightened. That's right, she said. The silence on the frequency lasted 3 full seconds, and she knew she'd surprised him twice, once by being wrong and once by saying so. You admit this. I read your wingman wrong, she said. I built a picture off a laugh, and the picture was bad. It cost me a hard break and about 400 pounds of gas. I'll be fixing that red for the rest of this engagement. A beat. You want a version where I don't make mistakes, you're going to have to find a different pilot. Why he? Said Sable 1 slowly. Would you tell me that? Because you already knew it. Sienna said, and lying to a man who already knows just tells him you're the kind of person he lies. Something happened on that frequency then that neither of them acknowledged and both of them heard. The mockery didn't come back. It never came back. Whatever had been in that man's voice at 6:47, the museum, the little sign, the children climbing on the concrete pad was gone, as completely as if it had belonged to a different person, and what stood in its place was a professional at the absolute top of his ability who had just found out that the fight was real. I'm going to make you come out of that canyon, he said. I know. I would prefer to do it in a way that does not require anything to happen to your ground element. I appreciate that, Sienna said. Do not appreciate it, said Sable 1. I said prefer. He came down, not into the canyon opening. Full afterburner along the axis of the corridor, low so low that the ridgeline was a suggestion rather than a fact, running the length of the cascade at a speed and altitude that had exactly one purpose: to fill her own sanctuary with so much noise and pressure and turbulence that flying in it became a coin flip. It was a professional decision. It was the correct decision. It was the decision Sienna had spent 20 minutes engineering him into making, because a man who commits like that is a man who has stopped being patient, and she could not survive patient. It worked exactly the way she designed it, and that is how she found out what it cost. Corinne Ashby heard the sound arrive before it arrived. That was the part she'd never be able to explain afterward, not to the board, not to her sister, not to the physical therapist in month 4. There was a pressure change first, a wrongness in her ears. Her hand was already on the door frame, and her hand tightened on the door frame, and the kid beside her opened his mouth to say something. Then the sky came apart. The shockwave came off the eastern face at an angle nobody had modeled, because nobody models a supersonic run down the axis of a canyon at 400 feet, and it hit a shelf of rock 200 meters above the corridor that had been sitting there loose since the sandstorm 11 days ago, waiting for a reason. The reason arrived. Adeyemi saw it in his mirror. That was the detail that stayed with him. He saw it in the mirror, which meant it was already behind him, which meant it was already on vehicle 3. He screamed into the net without any procedure at all. Rockfall on 3, we're hit, child. Sienna heard it at 280 knots in the bottom of the mill, and her entire body went cold, not enough. Her mind kept flying, kept working, kept holding the line through the corner, because that was what 11 months and 400 hours had built into her hands. Her body went cold, a full-length, top-to-bottom drop, the exact physical sensation she'd had 18 months ago on the ridge when the third recall came through. Anvil 6 Overwatch say casualties. We got standby. Marcus, say casualties. Vega's voice cut in, and Vega's voice was the flattest thing on that net. Overwatch Anvil 5. Vehicle 3 is pinned under approximately 4 tons. 2 casualties. 1 civilian female comes. She's conscious, she's talking, she is not going anywhere without a cover. 1 Navy engineer, right hand crushed at the wrist. He paused. Everybody else is up. 12 mobile. Copy 12 mobile. Overwatch. Vega again, and this time there was something under the flatness. That was the shockwave. That wasn't ordnance. That was just the sound. I know what it was, Sienna said. And here is the thing she did not say on the net. She had built that. Not the rockfall. She couldn't have known about a loose shelf from a storm 11 days ago. And every board that reviewed it would say so, and they would all be right, and it would not matter. But the commitment, the afterburner, run down the axis, the decision to stop being patient. She had spent 20 minutes constructing a man who would make that exact decision. She had asked him his flight hours to dent his pride. She had given him her name to make it personal. She had told him the truth about her own mistake to keep him engaged and off balance and pushing. Every single one of those choices had worked. The plan had functioned perfectly, and this was the invoice, and it had a woman's name on it, and Sienna Rourke did not know that name yet, but she was going to learn it before the end of the day, and she was going to remember it for the rest of her life. She flew the airplane. That was all there was. She flew the airplane because the 12 Mobile were still in a canyon with 2 fighters overhead, and grief was a thing you could only afford after everybody was out. Overwatch Control, Hale and there were steel in it now. I have your casualty report. Medical is inbound from Redstone Wheels up in 4. I need you to understand what that means. Say it. The convoy is static, Hale said. They cannot move Vehicle 3, and they will not leave 2 casualties in it. Extraction of the PIN personnel requires cutting equipment, and it requires them to stand still in the open for approximately 9 minutes. Sienna closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. 9 minutes. 9 minutes stationary in the throat of a canyon, Hale said with 2 fighters in the airspace. And Rourke, I want to say the next part carefully. Your protective tasking is discretionary from this point. The corridor is compromised. If you elect to disengage and return to base, no board on this Earth will find fault with it. Do you copy that? There was a long silence on the control frequency. Rourke, do you copy? I copy, Sienna said. And, ma'am, she said, I've been the person on the ground while somebody made that decision. I know what it sounds like from down there. Hale didn't answer for a minute. When she did, her voice had dropped into something private, and she used a name she had never once used on an open channel in 19 months. Sienna. Ma'am, fuel state. Sienna looked at the gauge. They'll have their 9 minutes, she said and cut the frequency. She did not answer the fuel question. Hale noticed. Hale would notice again 4 hours later in a room with a recorder running and would put it in the record herself because that was the kind of officer she was. Then Sienna Rourke did the single most tactically indefensible thing we had done all morning. She pulled the A-10 up out of the Cascabel, out of the rock, out of the masthead, out of the only environment on the planet where that aircraft could survive, contacted what was hunting it, and she climbed in the clear open sky in full view of 2 fifth-generation fighters. And she pointed her nose away from the convoy and pushed the throttles to the stops. It took us Abel 4 seconds to understand. She heard him understand. She's out. A pause. She is out of the terrain. She is in the open. Contact tallied. She's running west. She is not running. Sir, she is not running, said Saber One. And there was something in his voice that Sienna, 12 miles away, and bleeding fuel at a rate that turned her 40 minutes into 22, heard with perfect clarity through a compressed radio channel. It was the sound of a man in the middle of a fight understanding all at once that he had misjudged what kind of person he was fighting. She is pulling us off the corridor, he said dully. I was right, and he came anyway, and that was the part she had counted on. Because he had no choice. Whatever he understood, whatever he just worked out, he was a fighter pilot with a hostile aircraft in the open, and a wingman above the ridge, and 12 years of training that all said the same thing, and the one thing he absolutely could not do was let her sit unengaged in clear air where she could reset the entire fight at will. Both aircraft came off the canyon, and in the throat of the Cascabel, 12 people who had never in their lives thought about the difference between an aircraft that stays and an aircraft that leaves got out of their vehicles into a suddenly impossibly quiet moment. Adeyemi stood in the road with a hydraulic cutter in his hands and looked up. He'd been told not to. He looked anyway. Everybody looked. Way out west, small as a fleck of dirt on the windshield, there was a slow aircraft dragging 2 fast ones away from him. Vega was already at Vehicle 3 on his knees at the gap, talking to Corinne Ashby, in the low, even voice of a man who had done this before more times than he'd tell you. Ma'am, what's your name? Corinne, yes. Corinne, I'm Danilo. I'm going to be right here. My hip, something's wrong with my hip. Yeah, I know. We're going to get you out, and it's going to hurt, and I'm not going to lie to you about that part. He glanced up at the sky and back down. You hear how quiet it is. Ashby's breath was coming in short pieces. Yes. That's her doing that, Vega said. That's not luck. Somebody's paying for that. So you stay with me and you count your breaths, and in 9 minutes, you're gonna be on a helicopter, and someday you're gonna want to know what happened up there. And I'll tell you, deal. Ashby's hand found his sleeve and held it. Deal, she said. But 12 miles west at 14,000 feet in an aircraft that could not outrun, turn, outclimb, or outfight either of the two machines converging on him. Lieutenant Sienna Rourke ran her fuel numbers for the last time that night, 22 minutes. 9 of them belonged to the convoy. She keyed the guard frequency, and her voice was exactly as flat and exactly as calm as it had been at 0612 when she told a scared 27-year-old lieutenant, "I've got you." Sable 1. Rourke, 9 minutes, she said. "I do not understand." "They're cutting 2 people out of a vehicle down there," she said. "It takes 9 minutes. In 9 minutes, they're mobile, and you can do whatever you want with them." Pause. "Until then, I'm the most interesting thing in the sky, and you and I both know it." The channel was silent. "You are telling me your intention," said Sable 1. "Openly, on guard." "Yes." "Why?" "Because you're going to work it out in about 90 seconds anyway," Sienna said. "And I'd rather you spend those 90 seconds coming at me than looking back at that camera." She heard him breathe. "Lieutenant Rourke," he said, "I want you to know a thing before this continues." "Go ahead." "When my command told me your name this morning," he said, "and I asked him what it meant, my controller would not answer. He said only that I should be very careful. I pushed him, and he told me one sentence, and then he stopped talking." "What sentence?" There was a pause. "He said you were the one who stayed." Sienna Rourke sat in the seat of a 60-year-old airplane with 22 minutes of fuel and 2 of the best fighters in the world turning toward her, and she felt something behind her sternum go absolutely perfectly still. "Yeah," she said, "that's the one." And she turned into them. She drove to Las Vegas. Nobody told her to. Nobody would have told her not to either, which was worse in a way, because it meant the decision was entirely hers, and so was everything that came out of it. She was still in her flight suit. She hadn't eaten since Lure 230. Hale had given her until 1400, and it was 10:15, and the drive was 70 minutes each way if she pushed it, and she pushed it. She got to the trauma center at 11:28 and stood outside room 4 west for 20 minutes without going over. That was the part that surprised her. Not the drive, the 20 minutes. She had gone head-on at a 5th-generation fighter 4 hours earlier with a 0.4 of a second tolerance and no fire control support, and she had not hesitated for 2 full seconds, and now she was standing in a hallway that smelled like disinfectant, unable to make her hand move toward a door handle. A nurse walked past her twice. The second time she stopped. "You family." "No, ma'am. You look like you've been somewhere." Sienna glanced down at herself. Flight suit still zipped to the sternum, sweat rings dried into salt, hair still tied back the way it had been at Earth 350. "I was there," she said. The nurse looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable, and then she reached past her and pushed the door open about 6 inches and walked away without another word. So Sienna went in. Corinne Ashby was awake. That was the first thing that broke her a little. Somewhere in the 70-minute drive, she had built a version of this where the woman was unconscious, sedated, unable to look at her. A version where Sienna could say what she needed to say into a room that couldn't answer back. Ashby was awake and her eyes tracked to the door and stayed there. "You're the pilot," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Rourke." "Yes, ma'am." "They told me your name." Her voice was flattened out by whatever was in the ID, but underneath it there was somebody entirely present. "I asked for it. I don't know why. I just wanted to know who it was." Sienna stood at the end of the bed with her hands at her sides and did not sit down because sitting down would have made it a visit, and this wasn't a visit. "Ma'am," she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need to do it before anybody official tells you a cleaner version." "Okay." The rock came down because a fighter went supersonic at 400 feet down the axis of that canyon. "They told me that part." "They didn't tell you the rest," Sienna said. Ashby waited. "That aircraft was there because I put it there," Sienna said. "I spent 20 minutes deliberately building that pilot into a man who would commit. I asked him his flight hours to dent his pride. I gave him my name to make it personal. I told him the truth about a mistake I'd made because it kept him engaged and off balance and pushing." She kept her eyes on Ashby's. Every one of those choices worked exactly the way I designed them to work. He stopped being patient. He committed. And that shelf came off the wall. The room was very quiet. "You're telling me you did it," Ashby said. "I'm telling you I built the conditions for it. I couldn't have known about the shelf. There'll be a board, and the board will say, it wasn't my fault, and the board will be correct." Sienna's jaw tightened. "But I'm the only person in the world who knows exactly how deliberate the rest of it was. So you're going to hear it from me." Ashby closed her eyes. For a moment, Sienna thought that was the end of it, that she'd walk out of this room carrying it, which was what she'd expected, and if she was honest, what she'd come for. Then Ashby opened her eyes. "How many of us got out of that canyon?" she said. "Ma'am, how many?" 14, Sienna said. "All 14. And if you hadn't done any of that, if you'd flown polite, if you'd waited and let two of those things work the corridor on their own terms." Ashby's hand moved on the board. "How many of them?" Sienna didn't answer. "Don't do that," Ashby said. "Don't come in here and confess to me and then get careful. How many?" "Nobody in that corridor was in an armored vehicle," Sienna said. "If they'd been permitted to operate freely over a stationary convoy for 9 minutes, I don't have a number for you. It's not 14. Ashby nodded slowly. "Then I don't want your apology," she said. "Ma'am, I'm 34 years old. I fix antennas. I have never in my life had to think about any of this, and now I'm going to think about it for the rest of it." Her breath hitched and she pushed through it. "But I'm not stupid, Lieutenant, and I can run the same math you can. You made a call that got 13 people out clean and cost one of them her hip. You want me to tell you that's forgiven?" "No," Sienna said. "Good, because I'm not going to. It's not mine to forgive. It was never done to me. It was done around me." Her eyes were hard and red at the same time. "What I'll tell you is this. I would have made the same call. And if you ever get to the point where you wouldn't make it where you start flying so you don't have to sit in a room like this, then somebody like me dies in the canyon and never knows why." Sienna Rourke stood at the end of that bed and did not trust herself to speak for 3 full seconds. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "Come back," Ashby said, and shut her eyes. "When there's less of you in the flight suit, come back and tell me what actually happened up there. Somebody promised he would, and I don't think he's the type to forget. But I want it for you. Vega, that's the one. He won't forget," Sienna said. She made the 1400 debrief with 9 minutes to spare, and she gave them everything. That was Roy's sir, too, and it was not the obvious one. There were 4 hours of recorded testimony available to her, in which she came out of the morning looking like something carved on a monument, and every single person in that room would have accepted it, and the record would have closed clean. She gave them the other version. She gave them the misread on Grant, the laugh, the assumption she'd built on it, the trap she'd constructed for a man who was never going to walk into it. She gave them the overlimit break in the bottleneck and the number Boone had pulled off the spot. She gave them the fact that she had not answered Colonel Hale's fuel question at the 9-minute mark, and that she had not answered it because she had known the answer would end the tasking. She was 90 minutes in when the civilian at the far end of the table spoke for the first time. "Lieutenant Rourke." Sienna looked at her, sharp-featured woman with a laptop in a stillness that hadn't moved once in 90 minutes. "Ma'am, do you consider the injury to a civilian contractor an acceptable cost of the engagement?" The room went absolutely silent. Hale's hand moved half an inch on the table and stopped. Sienna took her time. She had learned somewhere between a ridge in a foreign country and a canyon in Nevada that the fastest answer to a question like that was almost always the worst one. "No, ma'am," she said. "I consider it a cost that I incur." "Those are the same thing." "They're not remotely the same thing," Sienna said. "Acceptable means I waited in advance and priced it in. I didn't. Nobody prices a rock shelf. What I did was make a series of aggressive choices that had a foreseeable general risk profile, and one of those risks landed on a person who never signed up for any of it." She held the woman's eyes. "So no, I don't call it acceptable. I call it mine. And I'll tell you the difference matters, ma'am, because the officers who start calling things acceptable are the ones who stop counting." The civilian wrote something. At the far end of the table, Naomi Hale looked down at her own hands and did not let her face do anything at all. The debrief ran 4 hours and 20 minutes. When it broke, Hale caught her in the corridor and put a hand flat on her arm to stop her. "Sienna, Ma'am, the fuel question. I know. You didn't answer me on a recorded channel with 14 lives in the balance and a flame out 11 minutes out. No, ma'am, I didn't. Hale's mouth was a thin line. You understand I have to put that in the record myself. I'd think less of you if you didn't. Don't do that, Hale said. Don't be gracious about it. I want you angry about it because angry is the only thing that makes it not happen again. She let go of the arm. You made me complicit in a decision I never got to make. That's the part, not the fuel, the part where you took the decision away from me because you already knew what I'd say. Sienna was quiet. Yes, ma'am, she said. That's what I did. Then say the other part. I'd do it again, Sienna said. Hale exhaled through her nose. Yeah, she said. I know. God help us both. 3 days later, Andre Volker drove 300 kilometers to Redstone Flats. He didn't call ahead. He didn't route it through liaison. He drove and we parked in visitor parking like a man delivering flowers, and he stood on the edge of the flight line in a plain dark jacket with no rank on it, and waited an hour and 10 minutes for her to come out of the operations building. Sienna stopped when she saw him. Out of the flight suit, out of the aircraft, out of the radio. He was smaller than she'd expected, 41 maybe, lines at the eyes. He looked like a man who had not slept much in 72 hours and had decided that sleeping was not the priority. Lieutenant Rourke. Major. He didn't offer his hand right away. He reached into his jacket instead and pulled out a folded document and held it out to her. Before I say anything, he said, read this. She unfolded it. It was a formal statement, his, filed 41 hours earlier through his own chain in which Major Andre Volker of the Czech Air Force accepted full and unqualified responsibility for the decision to conduct a supersonic run at 400 feet along the axis of the Cascabel corridor, identified that decision as the proximate cause of the rockfall and the resulting injuries to 2 personnel, and stated that the decision had been made in violation of no standing order and in violation of every instinct he had been trained to have. Sienna read it twice. At the bottom, he had added one line by hand. I request no litigation. Major, she said slowly, do you understand what this does to your exchange program? Yes. It ends it. Yes. You didn't have to file this. There is no version of that board where you get charged. The shelf was unstable from the storm 11 days ago. It's in the geological survey you would have walked. I know, Volkan said. Then why? And Andre Volkan, who had opened that morning by telling an entire region on guard frequency that he wanted a museum piece in pieces before breakfast, looked at a 25-year-old lieutenant on a flight line in Nevada and did not blink. Because you told the truth about your own mistake in the middle of a fight, he said, when there was no reason on this earth to do it. And I have been thinking about that for 3 days, and I have not been able to put it down. His accent thickened slightly. I did not know that was a thing a person could do, Lieutenant. Now I know. And a man who learns something like that and does nothing with it, that man is worse than he was before he learned. Sienna folded the paper back along its creases. I'm going to say something, and I need you to hear all of it, she said. Say it. You were the best engagement I have ever flown. Not the hardest or best. You pushed me past the edge of what I knew how to do. And because you did, I gave the best account of this platform and this methodology anyone has given in 10 years. She held the document out to him. What you did to that canyon wall belongs to you. What we did in that airspace belongs to both of us. Don't let anybody take the second thing away because of the first. He took the paper back and did not put it away. I want to tell you something also, he said. Go ahead. When my command told me your name and told me to be careful, I felt something in the air I had not felt in a very long time. He paused. I felt afraid, not of dying, of losing, of meeting something I was not equipped for. His mouth moved slightly. That feeling made me fly better than I have flown in 8 months. I pushed harder in that final approach than I have pushed in any engagement of my career, because you frightened me into flying my best. Major, the after action will say I was outmaneuvered, Bolton said. The telemetry will show exactly where my geometry broke. And every word of that will be true, and none of it will be the truth. He looked past her at the flight line. I do not know how to write that in the report. You don't, Sandy said. That's the point. The twist arrived on a Tuesday, and it arrived in the form of a man who gave her one name. Hale called her into an office at 1400, and there were already 2 people in it, a JAG officer she didn't know, and a civilian in a dark suit with a specific unhurried posture of somebody who works in a building where nobody uses their full title. Captain Rourke, Hale said carefully. Sit down. It's Lieutenant Mann. It's Captain as of 0600 this morning. Sit down. She sat. My name's Reeve, the civilian said. That's what you'll have for the duration. Captain, I wanted to ask you a question before I tell you anything. On the morning of the engagement, did you notice anything unusual in this installation? Sienna thought about it for 1 second. There was a vehicle in the operations lot, she said. Dark SUV, plates removed, backed into the slot by the fence where the camera angle's bad. 2 occupants, neither of them got out. Reeves' expression did not change, but something behind it did. You noticed that at 4:40 in the morning? Yes, sir. And you did nothing about it. I filed it, Sienna said. Same as I filed the fact that 2 aggressor aircraft made their first approach at full power with no attempt at masking, which is a choice you only make if you want to be observed. Same as I filed a wingman asking his lead on a private channel whether they were still inside the exercise. She met his eyes. I've been waiting for somebody to come explain those 3 things to me for 11 days, sir. The JAG officer looked at Hale. Hale did not look back. All right, Reeves said. Then I'll be direct because I don't think a soft version does either of us any good. He set his hands flat on the table. The exercise was real. Everything about the tasking, the corridor, the relay station, the 14 personnel. All of that was exactly what it appeared to be. But the aggressor element's communications were being monitored by a third party, using the exercise as cover, and the parameters Major Volkin was operating under were adjusted without his knowledge by someone with access to his frequency assignments. Sienna sat very still, adjusted how. He was told the aggressive open frequency engagement was an authorized deviation for psychological realism testing, Reeves said. It was not. Nobody in his command authorized it. Nobody in his command authorized it either. Somebody wanted a specific kind of pressure applied to a specific kind of pilot, and they wanted to watch what happened. Watch it for what? Sienna said. Reeve was quiet for a moment. To answer a question, he said, whether the A-10 platform in the hands of a maximally experienced pilot in a degraded high-workload terrain-dense environment still constitutes a credible threat to current generation fighters. Rowan was silent. They wanted a data point, Sienna said. They wanted a number, Captain. They wanted a survival time. Their working model said 14 minutes. He paused. You gave them 38 a broken coordinated approach in a head-on merge inside 4/10 of a second of a 5th-generation fighter, flown solo without fire control, support in a degraded fuel state by a pilot with 11 months in type. Sienna's mouth was drawn. And the answer, she said, wasn't the one they were hoping for. No, Reeve said, it wasn't. Besides, she sat with that for a full 10 seconds. Does Volkin know? He's been informed. He's cooperating fully. He's as angry as I've seen a man be in a conference room. Something almost human passed across Reeve's face. He asked whether it changed anything about the statement he filed. He was told it did. He asked us to file it anyway. Of course he did, Sienna said quietly. Captain, I need 6 sessions with you, more detail than you gave the panel. Every decision point, every calculation, every moment where you had information that shaped the maneuver. The telemetry can tell us what the airplane did. It cannot tell us what was happening in your head, and what was happening in your head is the entire strategic value of that moment. Is this voluntary? Completely, Hale said before we could. Sienna looked at both of them. Then I'll do it on one condition, she said. Same one I gave the board. Everything I give you is accurate, including the misread on the wingman, including the over-limit rate, including the fact that I withheld a fuel state for my own control. She leaned forward. If somebody upstairs needs a version where the pilot doesn't make mistakes, they need a different pilot because that version doesn't teach anybody anything, and it will get somebody killed in 3 years. Reeve looked at her for a long moment. Captain Rourke, he said, that is precisely what we need. The sessions ran across 9 days in a small room with a recorder and a second artist who wrote on paper and never spoke once. In the 5th session, Reeve asked her to walk him through the 2 seconds before she pushed the throttles at the merge. She told him about the voice. Not the words, she said, the cadence. When he said, fly your aircraft to his wingman, the rhythm came out faster than his baseline. Not much, a fraction. Nothing you'd catch unless you'd been listening to that specific man for 39 minutes. And that told you what? A pilot at the top edge of his confidence talks fast, Sienna said. Not overcommitted, not reckless, fully extended. And a fully extended pilot defaults to training when something unrehearsed enters the frame. She paused. 39 minutes. He'd seen terrain masking. He'd seen me disappear and come back. He'd seen a diesel below controllability. Every time he adapted, and he adapted fast because he's excellent. But a head-on from an A-10 at that closure was outside his entire accumulated experience set. Training says break. Experience says assess. At that closure, there's no time for hope. Reeves set down his pen. That analysis took you under 2 seconds. Yes, sir. In a degraded fuel state at the end of a 38-minute high workload engagement. Yes, sir. He looked at the analyst. Off the record, 30 seconds. The analyst set down her pen. Captain Reeves said, I've been doing this for 19 years. I've debriefed people after events that reshape policy at levels I can't describe in this room. He paused. What you did that morning isn't just tactically significant. It belongs in the category of human performances that change what people believe is possible. I wanted to say that to your face before the documentation turns it into a spreadsheet. Sienna Rourke sat in a small room and thought about 11 seconds in a cockpit in a hallway that smelled like disinfectant. On the record, officer, she said quietly. Colonel Genevieve Marchetti arrived on the 14th day and did not waste anybody's time. Captain, your name has come up in 3 independent training command assessments in 18 months. All 3 reached the same conclusion through completely separate processes. She opened the folder. There's a program. It's been in development for 11 months. It doesn't have a public name, and what I tell you in this room stays in it until you decide. Ma'am, we want you to build it and lead it. Close air support instruction for high-threat, terrain-dense, degraded environment operations. What you did in that canyon isn't in any manual in this base, and we can neither manufacture it nor afford to lose it. Sienna was quiet for a moment. I have 2 conditions. Marchetti's eyebrow moved a fraction. Most people take the folder first. I keep flying, Sienna said, not combat sorties, training sorties regularly. I can't teach this from the ground and hold the credibility it requires. If the program is built on what I know about this airframe, then the program requires that I keep knowing. Quarterly minimums, Marchetti said. I can justify quarterly as instructional methodology. Beyond that, you'd make a case for sorting. Workable. Second condition? Go ahead. Every pilot who comes through this program spends 2 weeks on the ground with the JTAC team, Sienna said, before they're allowed to touch a stick in my syllabus. 2 weeks lying in the dirt with a radio calling for something that may or may not come. The room went quiet. That's a significant scheduling burden, Marchetti said carefully. Yes, ma'am. Justified. Sienna Rourke thought about a ridge and 3 recall orders and 7 people coming down the slope. Because a pilot who has never been the person on the ground looking up, she said, will always fly the outcome instead of the moment. They'll be up there calculating whether the people below them are worth the risk to their airframe and their career and their next assignment, and they will not even know they're doing it. She paused. And the people on the ground can hear it now, on the radio, in real time. They can hear the math. And when they hear the math, they slow down and they hedge, and they start making decisions like people who expect to be left. Marchetti did not write anything. She just looked at her. And if they can't hear the math, then they move faster and they move better, Sienna said, because they're not spending any part of their thinking on the sky. That's not a morale factor thing. That's a tactical communication, and it happens in the first 30 seconds. And it happens whether the pilot intends it or not. The silence held for a long moment. 2 weeks in the dirt, Marchetti said. 2 weeks in the dirt. The colonel closed the folder. That's the whole program right there, she said. You just told me what it is. Everything else is scheduled. She stood. Orders in 3 weeks, Captain. Try to look surprised when they arrive. Boone was where he always was. She found him at the aircraft at 17:30 with the stress report queued on his tablet, and she handed him the orders without a word, the way she'd handed him things for 22 months. He read them. Then he read them again slower the way he read maintenance data when the first pass had resolved. He folded them and handed them back. Program director, he said, 30 days. Quarterly flights. Marchetti pushed it through. Boone nodded and looked at the airplane and was quiet for a long time. Marcus, she said. Elias. What 22 months you called me Boone? He didn't look at her. Figured today's the day. Sienna almost laughed and then found she couldn't. Show me the spars, she said. He pulled it up and turned the tablet around, and she looked at the stress signature from a break she'd taken at 280 knots in the bottom with 40 meters of clearance, and the number under it was past every limit printed in the manual. She held, Boone said. She always does. No. He said it flat, and he finally looked at her. That's the part I need you to hear, Captain, and I've been sitting on it for 2 weeks waiting for a day you could hear it. She held, past tense, one time, not always. He tapped the screen. Every mission you've flown, I put my hands on this machine after you, and I find out exactly how close it was. Stress marks, wear patterns, the things that held when they had no business holding. And every time you and this airplane find the edge together, and you don't cross it, he set the tablet down. The edge moved that morning, he said. I need you to know that it moved. Sienna Rourke stood on the flight line with a set of orders in her breast pocket and looked at the airplane that had brought her home with 7 minutes of fuel to spar past the ice. I know, she said. I felt it. Boone nodded once and something in his shoulders came down. That was all he'd wanted, not reassurance that she was fine, just the acknowledgement that she'd felt the truth of it and wasn't walking around with more confidence than the morning had earned her. She reached out then and put her palm flat against the fuselage the second time she'd touched that airplane since she'd climbed down from it 11 days ago. The metal was cool, the day's heat already given back. She wasn't thanking it. She wasn't saying goodbye to it either. She was admitting something, and the airplane was the only thing on that flight line that had been present for all of it. Behind her, Elias Boone picked up his tablet and got back to work, because that was how he'd been telling people he cared about them for 22 years. And he wasn't about to change the method now. Nobody named the program. That was the strange part. The official designation came down in a memo, a string of letters and a number functional and instantly forgettable. The kind of thing that exists so a budget line has something to attach itself to. Marchetti read it out loud at the first planning session, and 3 people wrote it down, and not one of them ever used it again. By the end of the 4th day, everybody on Redstone Flats was calling it the Castle School. Nobody decided that. It just appeared in the hallway and stayed the way, true name stay, because the people who understood the thing got to it before the people administering it did. Sienna read the framework document the training command analysts had prepared, read it once all the way through and set it down on the table. This starts in the wrong place, she said. The senior analyst, a man named Whitfield, who had spent 5 weeks on it, went slightly still. Ma'am, it starts with the platform's performance on here. That's standard for, I know it's standard, it's still wrong. She pushed it back across the table. You built this out of what happened. You've got the telemetry, you've got the turn rates, you've got the terrain integration map to 100 meters. All of it's accurate, and none of it's the thing. Marchetti's voice came off the video link from Washington. Then where does it start, Captain? With the pilot's decision architecture, Sienna said. How a human being builds and holds a tactical picture under conditions that are actively degrading their ability to build and hold them. She tapped the table once. The airplane is the instrument. The pilot is the system that operates the instrument. We've spent 40 years teaching people to optimize the instrument. Nobody's teaching the system. Hale at the end of the table was watching her with the expression of a woman hearing something articulated that she'd known intuitively for 20 years and had never once heard put into words. The canyon work, Hale said slowly. The terrain integration. That's a product of the decision architecture. It's not a separate skill. That's exactly right, man. So you can't teach it. You can't teach terrain integration, Sienna said. You can teach the cognitive framework that makes it possible. Then you put pilots in terrain and let the framework do the work. She looked at Whitfield and softened it because the man had put 5 weeks into it. Your document is the answer sheet. I need the curriculum to be the question. Whitfield sat back. Then to his enormous credit, he pulled a fresh page toward him and started writing. How long to build it, Marchetti said. 6 months to build it right. You have 5. Then 5. Sienna said without a beat of theater, and Marchetti, who had negotiated with a lot of officers in 30 years, made a small note in the margin of the one doesn't argue for the sake of it, and underlined it twice. The 5 months that followed were the most mentally punishing of her life, which was a sentence that covered a considerable amount of ground. She wrote she flew her quarterly sorties and came back from each one with new material, not because she did anything extraordinary, but because she was now paying a different kind of attention to her own decision-making, trying to make it legible to people who hadn't built the framework to receive it yet. She called Vega twice. The first call ran 40 minutes, and she got 3 usable lines out of it. The second ran 2 hours, and she got the spine of the entire first module. Most pilots, Vega said somewhere around the 90-minute mark. When they're up there working over your position, you can hear them out. Say no. They key the mic, and there's a half second before they talk. Every time, and in that half second they're deciding, he paused, not deciding what to do. Deciding whether you're worth the airframe, whether you're worth the fuel, whether you're worth the paperwork. If it goes bad, it's a half-second deal. Nobody's ever going to be able to prove it's there. But you hear it. Every guy who's ever been pinned down hears it, Vega said. And here's the thing, nobody upstairs understands. When we hear that half-second, we slow down. Not on purpose. We just start moving like people who expect to be loved. He was quiet a moment. With you, there was no half second. You keyed the mic and you were just there, like it wasn't a question, like it had already been settled somewhere else a long time ago. Sienna wrote that down word for word. It went at the front of Module 1 unattributed, followed by 5 lines she added herself. Commitment is not a value. It is a tactical transmission. The ground element reads it in real time and adjusts their behavior to it within 30 seconds of first contact. It is not separate from the mission. On a bad day, it is the entire mission. Marcus Adeyemi called her once from a deployment on a line that dropped twice. He sounded tired in the way deployed men sound tired, not from lack of sleep specifically, but from the accumulated weight of running an operational tempo for 11 weeks. They gave me a company, he said. I heard it. Ma'am, I've got a question, and it's going to sound stupid. Ask it. In the canyon when you told me not to look up. He hesitated. Why, everybody looked anyway. You had to know we looked. I did know. So why say it? Because it gave you something to fail at that didn't matter, Sienna said. You were about to have a very bad 4 months, Lieutenant. If the only instruction in your head is hold the convoy together, then every crack is a catastrophe. If there's a small, stupid one on top of it, your brain spends its panic there instead. There was a long silence on the line. That's deliberate. Yes. You did that in the middle of... It cost me nothing, Sienna said. It cost you nothing. And you drove that convoy through the throat of a canyon at 15-meter spacing with 2 fighters overhead, and you did not stop once. So it worked. Adeyemi laughed a short crack sound, and then he stopped laughing. I think about it every day, he said. I know. Not the rocks, not Ashby. I mean, I think about those too, but that's not the one. His voice went quieter. The one is that I got to find out early what it feels like when somebody doesn't make it. I'm 28. Some guys go a whole career and never find that out. A pause. I'm going to be somebody's air support for the rest of my life, ma'am, and I don't even fly. The first class of the Cascabel School reported on a Monday in February. 6 pilots, all A-10 qualifying, all selected off a composite assessment that had almost nothing to do with flight metrics and almost everything to do with decision-making under uncertainty. A set of criteria Sienna had personally rewritten after the review board sent her back a draft containing the phrase intuitive tactical integration. She'd struck it out and written underneath the ability to know what to do before you can explain why. The review board had accepted it, and Whitfield had told her later that it was the only phrase in the entire syllabus nobody had argued about. And on their first morning, before a single one of them saw a briefing slide, all 6 pilots were bused to a JTAC training range 90 miles north and handed a radio and told to lie in the dirt for 2 weeks. There was some resistance. Not much. Enough. A captain named Deshaun Foley, 400 hours in type, made the mistake of raising it in front of the group on day 1. Ma'am, respectfully, I've got more hours than half this room. What am I supposed to learn lying in a ditch? Sienna looked at him for a second. Captain, how many times have you keyed a mic and asked for close air support? That's not my job, man. That's my point, she said. In 14 days, you'll have done it about 200 times, and about 40 of those times, nothing will come. And I want you to remember precisely how that felt when you were the one in the airplane. She let it sit. You'll get your ditched, Captain, she said. It's the most expensive 2 weeks in the syllabus, and it's the only part I refuse to shorten. Andrei Volkin arrived at the start of the 5th month. The exchange program had in fact ended. His statement had done exactly what she told him it would do, and he had followed it anyway, and it had cost him 14 months of the assignment in a promotion board he was never going to see the results of. What it had not cost him was Marchetti's attention. She'd read it twice, called the Czech liaison herself, and brought him back on a contractor billet with a title so grand it took 4 people to explain, which meant in practice that Major Andrei Volkin flew aggressor sorties against the Cascabel School and did nothing else at all. Sienna met him on the flight line the morning he checked in. You look different, he said. Different from what? From the pilot who flew it in the face. He studied her. You look settled. I made some decisions. Yes, I heard. He set his bag down. Does it feel correct, the program? Sienna thought about it because he deserved the accurate version rather than the correct one. It feels correct, she said. It also feels like I traded something I'm not going to get back. Both of those are completely true, and I've stopped trying to make one of them cancel the other. Volkin nodded slowly. That, he said, is the most useful thing anybody has said to me in a year. He picked the bag back up. Then let us build something. Siri, I was brutal. That was the word that circulated among the 6 of them by the end of the first week, and it wasn't complaining, it was closer to awe. Volkin flew every engagement at full commitment. He did not go easy. He did not shape the fight so a student could find a lesson in it. He came at them the way he had come at Sienna Rourke over the canyon in Nevada, and he defeated them, and then he sat in the debrief and told them precisely how, with a specificity that was almost surgical and completely without cruelty. Lieutenant Priya Nandra lasted 9 minutes in her first engagement. In the debrief, Sienna let her talk for 4 minutes, then stopped her. Priya, ma'am, at the 6-minute mark, something changed in your flying. Tell me what it was. Nandra opened her mouth, closed it. She was 26 years old, top of her class at every stage of her career that had never once required her to say, I don't know out loud. I don't, she stopped again. I started calculating whether I could win. The room got very quiet. Say the rest of it, Sienna said. And while I was calculating whether I could win, Nandra said slowly, I wasn't flying. Not fully. Not fully. Sienna leaned back. That's the whole program, she said. Everything else in that syllabus is scaffolding for what you just said. You fly the moment. You don't fly the outcome. The outcome is made out of moments. If the moments are flown right, the outcome takes care of itself. She paused. That sounds like a poster. It's the single hardest thing you will ever learn to do, and it will take you years, and you started today. Nandra flew Volkin again 8 days later. She lasted 14 minutes. And in the debrief, unprompted, before Sienna could ask a single question, Volkin said, at the 7-minute mark, she was fine. Nandra looked up. I wish to be precise because I think it matters, Volkin said. It is different from the other side. When a pilot is calculating, I can feel a hesitation in the geometry, a fraction ahead. At 7 minutes, that stopped. I had to work harder in the following 90 seconds than at any point in our previous engagement. He shrugged very slightly. I do not know how to put that in a report either. Sienna watched Priya Nandra receive that, not with the flush of external validation, with something quieter and better, the first real recognition of the relationship. A pilot built with her own judgment, which was the only thing the Cascabel School had ever actually existed to create. 4 months after the first class graduated at U-6 form, on a Thursday, the emergency net at Redstone Flats came alive. Sienna was in her office with a coffin she hadn't touched. A civilian search and rescue team. 8 people, 2 helicopters had gone into a canyon system 200 miles northwest, chasing a downed hiker in a sandstorm that closed behind them, and both aircraft were on the deck with rotors damaged and 8 people on the ground in terrain that vehicles could not reach. That was bad enough. Then the second part came through and Sienna set the coffee down. 2 unidentified aircraft were operating in the airspace above them. No transponder. No response on guard. making low passes over a stationary group of civilians in a canyon they couldn't leave. Nobody knew who they were. Nobody knew what they wanted. What everyone knew within 90 seconds was that this was not an exercise and there was exactly one air asset inside response room. Lieutenant Priya Nandra, single ship, A-10. Sienna was on her feet before she knew she'd stood up. She got to operations in 4 minutes and Hale was already there. And Hale saw her face and put a hand up before she said a word. No, ma'am. Captain Rourke, you are quarterly minimums, you are not on the alert roster, and you have not flown in 19 days. Hale's voice was flat and fast. There is one airframe fuel, and it is airborne with Nandra in it. There is no second airplane. That is not a policy question, it's an inventory question. Boone can have a jet up in 40 minutes, Hale said. Boone already told me. 40 minutes and it's 200 miles, so call it an hour and 15 before you're overhead. She held her eyes. This is over in an hour and 15, one way or the other. Sienna stood in the middle of the operations floor with her hands at her sides, and every single thing in her body, every instinct built on the ridge 18 months before she ever touched a stick. Every reflex that had made a 22-year-old with a broken leg refused 3 lawful recall orders, told her to get in something and go. She did not go. That was the hardest thing Sienna Rourke ever did in her life, and there was no telemetry for it, and no board ever reviewed it, and nobody in that room understood at the time that they were watching it happen. Put her on the speaker, she said. Nandra's voice came into the operations center at 0631, and it was steady. Redstone Anvil, actual, this is Sabre 4-1. I have visual on the rescue element. 8 personnel, 2 rotary aircraft, both down the canyon floor. I have 2 unidentified fast movers working the corridor at approximately 1,500 feet. Sabre 4-1, do you have identification? Negative. No transponder, no markings. I can resolve. No response, on guard. A pause. Redstone be advised they've made 2 passes directly over the survivors since I arrived. They are not searching. They know exactly where those people are. Somebody in the operations center said quietly, God. Hale keyed the mic. Sabre 4-1, what is your intent? And Sienna Rourke, standing 8 feet from that speaker, with her arms folded and her jaw locked. A 26-year-old lieutenant, she had personally taught say the following in a voice with absolutely no map in it at all. Redstone, I'm going to put myself between them and the survivors and stay there until somebody makes me leave. Sienna closed her eyes. It took 81 minutes. Nandra flew the canyon. She used the terrain the way she had been taught to use it, which was not by memorizing it. She'd never seen that canyon before in her life, but by reading it in real time through a framework built for exactly that. She dropped into it, she got low, she got slow, and she put an aircraft designed 60 years ago directly underneath 2 unknown machines that could not turn with her and could not follow her, and critically could not get a clean pass at the survivors without going through her first. She never fired. She never once had a solution she was legally permitted to take. What she had was position in the absolute transmitted unmistakable fact that she was not going anywhere. At 0709, one of the unidentified aircraft made a supersonic run down the canyon axis, the exact maneuver, the exact profile, the exact intent that had brought 4 tons of Nevada down on Glen Ashby 11 months earlier. Nandra saw it setting up. She had 11 seconds. Anvil ground element, Sabre 4-1, get under the rotor decks. All personnel get under something now. They got it under. The shockwave came off the wall and took a slab of rock off the shelf and put it in the canyon floor 40 meters from where 8 people were lying underneath 2 dead helicopters, and not one of them was touched. In the operations center at Redstone Flats, Sienna Rourke made a sound she was not aware of making. Hale looked at her. You taught her that, she said. No, ma'am, Sienna said, and her voice was not entirely steady. I told her a story about a woman named Corinne Ashby on the first day of the course, and she's the one who remembered it 11 months later with 11 seconds to work with. 80735, the 2 unidentified aircraft broke north and left the airspace and never came back. And to this day, nobody in the public record has said whose they were. At 0803, the first rescue rotary from Melody put down on the canyon floor. And at 0847, Priya Nandra landed at Redstone Flats with 11 minutes of fuel remaining. Sienna was on the flight line. So was Boone. So were four of the six graduates of the first Cascabel class, who had driven in from three different installations the moment the net lit up, which was not authorized by anybody, in which nobody ever heard of. The aircraft rolled in, the engines cut, and Priyanandra sat in that cockpit without moving. 11 seconds. Nobody counted them but Sienna, and Sienna counted every one. And when the canopy finally came up and a 26-year-old lieutenant climbed down a ladder on legs that were not entirely reliable, the thing Sienna Rourke felt was not fun. It was recognition. Nobody had taught her the 11 seconds. It wasn't in the syllabus. It was never going to be in the syllabus. She had found it herself the way you find it on the far side of something you didn't know you could survive. Boone got to the airplane first, because Boone always got to the airplane first. Ma'am, he said, tablet already up. Anything I need to know before I put my hands on him. Nandra opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She tried again. I broke past the limit, she said, in the second turn. I don't know by how much. I felt it. Boone stopped. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he looked past her at Sienna Rourke with an expression that a person could have gotten a whole career out of, and then he looked back at Nancy. Copy that, man, he said quietly. Thank you for telling me. Sienna walked over. She had 100 things she could have said, and every one of them was a lesson, and she said none of them, because Nandra didn't need a lesson. Nandra needed about 4 hours in the water to handle this. Priya, ma'am, the lieutenant straightened up automatically. Ma'am, by the ground element, they're all 8 for 8. Nellis has them. Nandra nodded, then she nodded again. Then her face came apart very slightly at the corners, and she got it back under control. Ma'am, at the 20-minute mark, I started calculating, she said. I want that on the record. I started calculating whether I could actually stop them or whether I was just standing there. And I stopped calculating, Nandra said, because it didn't matter. Whether I could stop them wasn't the question. The question was whether I was going to be there. And I already knew that. I knew it before I took off. Sienna Rourke stood on a flight line in Nevada and understood with a completeness that arrived all at once that the last 11 months had worked. Not the syllabus, not the telemetry, not the strategic assessment sitting in a building in Virginia with her name on the cover. That, a sentence out of a 26-year-old's mouth on a tarmac of 911. Say that again in the debrief, Sierra said, word for word. Don't clean it up. Yes, ma'am. And Priya, ma'am, somebody's going to ask you today whether it was worth the risk to the airframe. Nandra's chin came up. I know exactly what I'm going to tell them, ma'am. Later, much later, after the debrief and the calls and the 2 hours Sienna spent on the phone with Reed, who wanted to know things she wasn't going to give him for free, she walked back out onto the flight line. Boone was still with the airplane. He was going to be with it until midnight, and both of them knew it. Spar's fine, he said without looking up. She went past, but she went past clean. I'll have the full number in the morning. She told you before you found it. Yeah, Boone kept working. That's the part I'm going to think about. Sienna stood there, and then she reached out and put her palm flat against the fuselage of an airplane that was not hers. Nandra's aircraft, tail number, she'd have to look. Up metal still warm from the canyon, 200 miles northwest, where 8 civilians had spent 81 minutes learning what it feels like when somebody doesn't leave. The third time she ever did that. The first had been at 11,000 feet with 14 people below her and no idea what the money was about to cost. The second had been 11 days later on the ground, admitting to a machine what she couldn't say to her viewpoint. This one wasn't a confession and it wasn't a promise. It was simpler than either. It was a handoff. She took her hand away. Boone glanced up. You headed back in. Second cohort reports at 0700, Sienna said. 12 of them this time. Marchetti doubled it. 12. He whistled low. You got 12 ditches lined up for him. 14, Sienna said. I added 2. And Elias Boone, 22 years on a flight line, laughed for the first time in 11 months and went back to work. They still call her the Widowmaker. Not because of what she flew, not because of 4 seconds in the 4/10 of a second, and not because of a canyon in Nevada on a morning that started with a man on an open frequency, joking about a museum piece with a little sign. They call her that because of a ridge 18 months earlier, and 3 lawful recall orders, and 7 people who came down the slope with her behind them. Because that is what the name has always meant to everyone who has ever been on the ground looking up. She is the one who stayed. And in canyons and corridors and ridgelines, she will never see flown by pilots whose names she will never learn, taught by pilots. She taught herself she is staying still.